Hello guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls. It's me, Big Mike, and welcome to a special episode of Big Mike's Big Universe. Now you may be asking, what makes this episode so special? And it's special for the fact that this is the first time we're not going to be covering a news story, but instead we're going to be taking a look at the deep history of UAP or UFO sightings around nuclear sites. These type of sightings have happened all over the world at various types of places. But why? Well, could there be beings from elsewhere that could be concerned about our own safety? Could such beings from elsewhere be alarmed that we could be destroying our environment or some natural resource they care about? Could it be something man-made? Could it be some type of natural occurrence that we don't really know about? No one knows for sure, but what we do know is the history is there. Now, with that being said, I do want to make it very clear that this video is not an exhaustive history on the subject. In writing this, I actually set out with the purpose of doing just that. However, I soon realized just how deep the history goes and realized that wouldn't be possible. So instead, I've chosen a couple of instances, one from almost every decade from the 1940s until the Fukushima disaster. I've also attempted to give examples from the various types of nuclear sites, research and development areas, nuclear weapon facilities, and power plants and disaster sites. So I wanted to make sure all of these areas had at least an example to illustrate this. However, I do have to say, if you are interested in this subject, I do have a couple of recommendations I can make, and I've used these sources heavily in preparing this video. The first is a great book called UFOs and Nukes: Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites by Robert Hastings. Now, this book is an invaluable resource. I cannot stress that enough. It focuses just on the military areas or areas in which weapons are kept. However, there is an appendix that does touch on areas such as nuclear power plants and disaster areas. And another major source for me, and I would highly recommend this one as well, is an article in Vice, Why Do UFO Sightings Keep Happening Near Nuclear Sites? By Nathaniel Janowitz. I would highly recommend you check that out as well if you're interested in this subject. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into some history, fam. What follows is a series of stories and incidents. At the end, I will share my thoughts. Early history. UAP appearing in and near nuclear sites have a long and extensive history. Such an extensive history, this relationship actually begins a bit before the actual ignition of the nuclear age. According to author Dr. Jensen Anderson, such activity goes all the way back to when scientists were seeking to gain an understanding of fission in the 1930s. Unfortunately, after searching for corroborating evidence, I have found nothing. No official documents, no journal entries, no newspaper articles, no photos, or anything else like that to back up her claim. Now, I'm not saying she's wrong or this did not happen. Perhaps she has access to information that I don't have. But on my end, I've not been able to corroborate that. What I can find evidence to corroborate is that later, in the 1940s, prior to the utilization of the atomic bomb in the Second World War, such places did see an uptick in activity. One such place was Hanford, Washington, which also happened to have been one of the principal locations of the Manhattan Project. In fact, it was this location that produced the bomb that was used in the bombing of Nagasaki. One incident from the area was reported in late 1944. An unusual object was seen in the sky, and a fighter aircraft was sent up to take a closer look. The pilot radioed that if he went any higher, he would burn the motor out in his aircraft. Despite this, he was told to keep climbing. The pilot got up to about 40,000 feet and still was lower than the object. He would report that it was a large, oval, orange object about the size of 3 aircraft carriers. 1940s. Dr. Jensen Anderson says things really start to happen after the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the Second World War, after which he says you see a proliferation of appearances, one right after another, in and around areas associated with nuclear weapons. According to a declassified government document dated to 1949, 2 incidents occurred near Los Alamos, one in 1948 and one in 1949. And if that name sounds familiar to you, Los Alamos was another major place in the Manhattan Project. I'm going to now attempt to read an excerpt from the document. Please bear with me. It's a typewritten document, and the condition I received it in is not the best, so please bear with me. During the past 2 months, various sightings of unexplained phenomenon have been reported in the vicinity of the AEC installation at Los Alamos, New Mexico, where these phenomena now appear to be concentrated. During December 1946, on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 11th, 13th, 14th, 20th, and 26th, sightings of unexplained phenomena were made near Los Alamos by special agents of the Office of Special Investigation, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors, and private citizens. On January 6, 1949, another similar object was sighted in the same area. 1950s. In a declassified FBI letter bearing the date of May 15, 1952, that was sent by the then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to both the Director of the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations and the Inspector General of the Air Force, there are reports of flying discs that had been seen on May 10th at the Savanah River plant. In the letter, Hoover mentions 4 DuPont plant employees saw 4 disc-shaped objects approaching the 400 area from the south, which disappeared in a northerly direction. 2 other discs, each flying alone, were sighted by the same workers shortly thereafter. Hoover continued, the discs were described by the above-mentioned employees as being approximately 15 inches in diameter and yellow to gold in color. All the objects were allegedly traveling at a high rate of speed and at a high altitude without any noise. Hoover wrote that one of the solitary discs was reportedly traveling at such a low altitude it had to rise to pass over some tall tanks, which are in the 400 area. The employee referred to the above advised the objects were weaving from left to right, but seemed to hold a general course. 1960s. In the height of the Cold War, a perhaps not so harmless encounter, but perhaps one of the most well-known encounters took place in March of 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Robert Salas, who at the time was a missile launch officer that had 10 missiles with nuclear warheads under his control, had one day received word from other officers of UAP sightings. After receiving this word, his missiles went offline and were unlaunchable. In a 2023 interview, Salas described the event as, I felt we were under attack, but the assailants weren't any Cold War foes. Soviet technology couldn't have abruptly disabled the missiles' guidance and control systems, which is what happened that night. You would have to have sent individual signals to each missile, and within seconds, we had no power. This had never happened before, and we have nothing that could do that now. The NCO had also described the approach of the silent object, which was making unusual controlled maneuvers, such as flying very fast, coming to a dead stop, then reversing course and making 90-degree turns, said Silas, who was locked into the subterranean capsule for security reasons. He was screaming in the phone, terrified. I told him to secure the facility at all costs. Responding to his orders, other security guards scrambled to other launch sites in the complex, only to see glowing objects hovering over them, said Silas. It was reported they lost radio contact with the flight security controller, and they were very shaken by the experience. Silas added, less than a minute after the pulsating object had arrived over his launch control center, it had quickly departed. The dumbfounded officer soon found himself in a meeting with his squadron commander and a special investigations officer, and was told the incident didn't involve any kind of Air Force exercise. At some point in time later, he learned that at a nearby site, 10 more missiles were taken offline under similar circumstances, Very similar circumstances where UFOs were sighted over the launch facilities. 1970s. Author Robert Hastings received a letter from First Lieutenant Walter F. Billings. In it, he described how in the 1970s he was a deputy crew commander and was assigned to the 90th Strategic Missile Wing at F.E. Warren Air Force Base near Cheyenne, Wyoming. At the time, the missile squadrons at the base were busy converting to Minuteman III missiles, each one armed with 3 nuclear warheads, hidden in underground silos sprinkled across the tri-state region, where the borders of Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska converge. Each of Warren's 20 Launch Control Capsules, LCCs, controlled 10 missiles. In accordance with the standard operating procedure, each LCC had its own Security Alert Team, or SAT team, which protected the capsule and its missiles. Late night one evening in the fall of 1973, Billings was underground in the Gulf LCC when he and his crew commander overheard an urgent message on the capsule's radio. In those days, said Billings, the UHF radio was turned on at all times. If one LCC spoke to their security alert team or other LCCs, all 20 LCCs heard the conversation. On this occasion, the launch crew at another LCC, designated India, had just ordered their security guards to investigate an out-of-security zone alarm, triggered at one of India's 10 missile launch facilities. This meant that someone or something had penetrated the security fence surrounding the area. As the security team raced to the imperiled silo, Billings heard the India launch crew excitedly report that its inner security zone alarm had also been triggered, indicating that the missile launcher itself had been penetrated in some manner. This was an extremely serious development. Upon arriving at the site, the stunned security guards reported seeing a large, bright UFO hovering over it. The LCC crew advised the SAT team to proceed no further and to observe only, said Billings. Approximately a minute later, the UFO moved off slowly for several thousand feet and then sped off at a high rate of speed. The guards described the UFO as having rotating colored lights surrounding a large glow of orange, which changed to bluish white and then sped off. Billings emphasized that the conversation between the India LCC crew and the SAT team was heard by 19 other LCC crews on duty that night. The 1980s and 1990s. In 1986, the worst nuclear disaster in history took place. That, of course, is the Chernobyl disaster that occurred in present-day Ukraine. It began with the explosion of the number 4 reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat. Dr. Vladimir Vieropstov, director of the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomenon in Kharkiv, Ukraine, relates the following. About 1 month before the Chernobyl disaster, I had a talk with an air traffic controller of the Kharkov airport. He told me that according to pilots' reports, there was a rising number of UFO observations in the area of the Chernobyl nuclear power station. Later, it became known that on the night of the fire at the Chernobyl nuclear power station, some 3 hours after the explosion, a team of nuclear specialists saw in the sky over the station a fiery ball the color of brass. Just before the observation, these specialists measured the level of radiation in the place where they were standing. It was 3,000 milliröntgen per hour. After the UFO left, it was only 800 milliröntgens per hour. An article published in September 2002 by Pravda quotes a Mikhail Voritsky as describing the event as, I and other people from my team went to the site of the blast at night. We saw a ball of fire and it was slowly flying in the sky. I think the ball was 6 or 8 meters in diameter. Then we saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching toward the 4th unit. The object was some 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted for about 3 minutes. The lights of the object went out and it flew away in the northwestern direction. 3 years later, on September 16, 1989, the fourth power generating unit emitted radiation into the atmosphere. Several hours later, a doctor saw an object in the sky above the Chernobyl plant. Dr. Gospina described it as amber-like. She said she could see the top and the bottom of it as well. In October of 1990, a reporter from the newspaper The Echo of Chernobyl, Via Navran, was photographing the machine shop of the Chernobyl plant. He says, "I photographed the top of it, including a part of the hole above. I remember everything very well. I did not see any UFO. However, when I developed the film, I clearly saw an object that was hovering above the hole in the roof. The object looked like the one Dr. Gospina saw." The Fukushima disaster. The final incident we're going to be looking at is going to revolve around the Fukushima disaster. It was one of the worst nuclear disasters ever, second only to Chernobyl. It was due to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and the tsunami that happened as a result. These took out the power grid of the power plant. With both the main power grid down and the plant's backup energy sources damaged, it was unable to sufficiently cool its reactors, leading to a partial meltdown. Amid the chaos, several people came forward testifying to seeing balls of light over the damaged reactor. At one point, a video even shows light seemingly dancing in a circle over the area for around 2 minutes. This has seemingly been a common occurrence in the area as well. According to a priest from a local temple known as the Inmoyon, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so please forgive me. Anyway, a local priest from that temple in the Fukushima prefecture stated, "The UFOs came after the explosion. There were so many of them, I was shocked," the priest told Vice. He continued saying, "Radioactive energy was leaking everywhere. I believe the UFOs came to readjust the flood of radioactive energy in order to save us. That's my theory anyway." Lights have not been the only thing seen over the Fukushima disaster area either. Not long after the disaster, a video surfaced of a large, white flat object hovering over the plant. While the video has been criticized as being far from the object, others point out that both the size and speed point to the fact that this, whatever it is not normal. Now I would like to share my thoughts. By now, hopefully you have a good appreciation for the history of UAPs and their appearances around nuclear sites. And now you may also have a good idea that there is a connection. Not sure what that connection may be, but there is a connection between UAPs and nuclear sites. Now with all of this, perhaps now we can examine a bit of the why. And here we're going to look at several reasons why, or several examinations of their motives, their characters perhaps is a better word to use. And I'm going to give you my thoughts and how they may apply to the situations we talked about earlier. A lot of these are things that I've gleaned from the community, though I have added a couple of my own thoughts here as well. First, it needs to be said that essentially all of these assume that whatever is doing this is of a non-human intelligence. Perhaps aliens, as Dr. Jensen Anderson believes, or perhaps as interdimensional beings, as David Grush believes. So we'll be setting aside any other explanation for this discussion. And I think this can reasonably be done. Given the earliest date of the first occurrence when it happened, I do not believe this is anything man-made. Also, given all the occurrences, like the maneuvering, and especially the whole shutting down of the nukes episode that took place in the Malmstrom event, I don't believe this is anything natural. I don't believe this is St. Elmo's fire. I don't believe this is swamp gas. I mean, if there's swamp gas that can shut down nukes, please let me know, fam. There are 3 common views passed around in the community, and what follows will be an examination of each view individually. The first view is that they're benevolent and they want to help us. This is the view of the priest from the temple near Fukushima, and this is also the view of Dr. Jensen Anderson. And this view is used to explain why they would lower the radiation levels of the disaster sites. if the lowering of the radiation was truly the result of these UAPs. And it's also been used to explain why they would shut the nuclear weapons down. I can't really say anything about the radiation levels, but in regards to shutting the nukes down, if whatever's doing this was truly benevolent, why would they only shut them down temporarily? I mean, if they have the technology to take them offline like this, or like they did in the story, then why couldn't they just take them offline for good? They certainly would have the technology to neutralize that. And that's really my biggest critique of this view, that they're benevolent. The second view is that they are neutral. This is one of the positions held by David Grush, and in his view, they are neutral at best. Now, I've seen this one go a couple of different ways, but I'll mention just the two most relevant ones here. One view is that they're like zoologists studying animals out in the wild, observing but not interfering. Or they're like anthropologists, observing a culture to better understand it without interfering with it. Perhaps they want to get a feel for what we're capable of in regards to weapons or maybe technology in general. So are nothing more than scouts, observing but not interfering. This is also a position held by David Grush. This would explain their fascination with military bases, power plants, and research facilities. The other relevant neutral view is they really don't care for us. They don't hate us, they don't love us, they just don't care either way. However, according to this view, they are concerned about the environment, or perhaps some of our natural resources, and intervene in our affairs only to prevent us from doing something that may harm the Earth as a whole, or damage a resource they are interested in. And this would explain why they get involved in some situations, but not others. The final view is that they're malignant. This is a view held by David Grush. Given the examples we have looked at here today, this may not seem like a likely view, but please bear with me. Now, this view is much like the second neutral view I just discussed, but in this take, they're not just interested in our environment or resources, but in our planet as a whole, and they perhaps are waiting for more to come at some point in the future to deal with us. And one unique view I could contribute here is an interpretation of the Malmstrom event. So far, I've only seen interpretations of that event that paint them as being either benevolent or neutral. But what if that was meant to be a malevolent act? A power play meant to show us how effortlessly they could do away with our most powerful weapons, and thus showing us our true place on a totem pole. And as I mentioned earlier, if they wanted to protect us or the environment, surely they could have made it where those nukes never would have came back online. Another take, and this is one I haven't seen anywhere else, and this one is a bit more personal, is that none of these, in fact, are the case, and perhaps maybe these ideas are mere human constructs projected onto other forms of intelligence that may not have these concepts. If this is indeed the case, then it could also be that whatever reason they have for doing this could be just as alien as they and their technology are. One conclusion I've came to since I started covering the David Grush situation is that perhaps many of our presumptions about life elsewhere, such as whether they are friendly or evil, may in fact be human or even earthling projections on creatures that have no such concepts. And so, perhaps whether or not they're neutral, they're benevolent, they're malignant, these may all very well be just human concepts projected out onto beings that don't have these concepts, much like how we do in the natural world as it is as humans. Oh, nature's beautiful, nature's friendly, nature's caring, nature's harsh, nature's evil, whatever your point of view may be. We see this all the time in our own sphere. So it's not out of the question that we would do this elsewhere as well. But in the end, all of this is pure speculation, and we'll never likely understand the why behind it. So in closing, I want to leave you with this. In his interview with Ross Coulthart, David Grush said,
"We'll never really understand full intent in that because we're not them, whatever them is or are, but I think what appears to be malevolent activity has happened."
Welcome back to another Big Mike and Slate. And this is another unplanned one as well, unscripted. So what you're hearing here is all natural, baby, straight off the cuff. And again, much like with my Sora AI video, I feel like the subject matter here was a little bit too heavy to do my normal shtick. So what I want to do here is I just want to give a shout out to all my special friends and such, my artists, and all you lovely guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls. So first, I want to give a shout out to my artist. She's fantastic, and she is coming back to Twitter, fam. So please give Fran a follow, and please check her out for all of your art needs. Secondly, I want to give a huge shout out to Honk Flap, my bestie and my manager. My unofficial manager, but still my manager nonetheless. She has helped me out with a lot of investigation. She helps me by letting me bounce ideas off of her. And there's so much more she does for me. So a special thanks to her. All of my other friends on Twitter. I wouldn't be here without you all. If you're new to the channel, I cover so many types of content. I cover AI, I cover UAPs, I talk about media I'm interested in, like Beavis and Butthead. I talk about horror movies. I talk about everything that interests me. So my content's kind of all over the place. You might not like everything, but chances are maybe something I'll cover will interest you. So if you like this content, please subscribe and turn your notifications on. And if you like this video, like it. Or if you dislike it, dislike this video. But regardless, leave me a comment below and tell me what you think. But regardless of your view, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, fam, remember, just be yourself and you'll be awesome. Peace out!